and welcome to the 2021 edition of the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival. I'm Tennille Niwalo, the Education Coordinator for the TTFF 21 edition. This year, we have an abundance of films and industry events that consist of masterclasses, workshops, presentations, panels such as this one, talks, info sessions, and a new discussion series entitled Ask the Veterans. We will also have Q&As and we'll be live with the filmmakers, so please be sure to check out our website or social media pages to find all the events or films that you might be interested in. Today, I'd like to welcome you to the documentary panel with filmmakers that have projects selected for this year's festival. All the panels are brought to you with the support of Shell, Trinidad and Tobago Limited. Our moderator today is Janine Mendes-Franco. Janine is a writer and film producer who particularly enjoys documentary filmmaking. Her film, A Loss of Innocence, from 2006, was screened at both the UN Film Festival and the inaugural Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival. And she was the local producer of the Trinidad leg of National Geographic's docuseries Strange Days on Planet Earth back in 2005. In 2013, she produced a dramatic film, Aftermath, which was awarded the jury prize for Best Local Short at the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival. And in 2018, pitched a dramatic series at the festival's Caribbean Film Mart, which is in the early stages of development. Her short documentary, A Writer's Haven, has been accepted for screening at TTFF 2021. Janine also holds a Bachelor of Applied Arts degree in Radio and Television Arts from Ryerson University, Toronto, Canada. So without further ado, I will pass you over to the lovely Janine, who will introduce you to the rest of the panelists.
Thank you, Tennille, and welcome everyone to this wonderful documentary filmmaking panel. We have five at the moment, very different documentary filmmakers, expecting one more to come into the room. And I suspect we'll discover we have a lot in common, even though these films are all very different. So I'm going to go alphabetically. Eleonore is not yet in the room, so let me just start with Nicola. Nicola Cross is a self-shooting filmmaker with a focus on women and girls. She was born in Tanzania, raised in Trinidad and Tobago, and attended university in the UK. Since 2012, Nicola has been using filmmaking as a tool for women's empowerment, shifting the dominant narratives, and supporting the work being done to improve the lives of women and girls. Welcome, Nicola. Thanks for being part of the panel.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you.
Let's move on to François. So after completing a master's in directing and documentary production at Lyon 2 University in France, François Gruson worked in production, first in Lyon and then in Cambodia, before landing in French Guyana. In addition to developing documentary productions, he directs some of them. In 1979, Mong de Javoué is his first film.
Thank you.
Welcome, François. Moving on now to Ian Harnarine, who was born in Canada to Trinidadian parents. After earning a bachelor's degree in physics and astronomy and a master's in nuclear physics, he eventually became bored with physics research, moved to Brooklyn, and became a filmmaker. Ian has since earned an MFA from NYU's Graduate Film School. He is a member of the National Board of Review, the Television Academy, and the Academy of Canadian Cinema and Television. His short film Doubles with Slight Pepper won the Best Short Film Award at TIFF and the Canadian Academy Award. Another film of his, Carony, premiered at TIFF and continues to screen at festivals worldwide. Ian's work for Sesame Street has garnered an Emmy nomination, and he has been profiled in Filmmaker Magazine, the New York Times, Caribbean Beat, and Playback Magazine. Welcome, Ian.
Always great to see you, Janine. Thank you.
Now we're moving on to another Trinidadian, well, someone with Trinidadian roots, let's put it that way. Trinidad-born, Boston-bred, Rudy Hypolite is a director and producer. He's an American Film Institute Robert M. Bennett Short Film Award and Henry Hampton Feature-Length Documentary Award recipient. His previous films include Push, Madison vs. Madison, the acclaimed inner-city sports documentary currently in distribution on ESPN Classics, and PBS's World America Reframed and American Graduate Series. Rudy manages Harvard University's Science Center Media and Technology Services and he's the former director, editor, and producer for the Harvard at Home multimedia website. He's a graduate of Boston University's television and film program. And his film in this year's film festival was also nominated for an Emmy. So welcome, Rudy. Very happy to have you here.
Happy to be here with each of you.
And last but not least, the youngest filmmaker of the bunch, Alexandra Warner, graduated from NYU Gallatin School of Individualized Studies with a BA in documentary production and international relations. Her senior thesis explored storytelling as a tool for social and political change. She's the founder and director of Untold Docuseries Limited, a documentary series created to challenge stigmas, empower the misrepresented, and influence social change. The pilot episode, The Forgotten Boys, is an official selection in Liftoff Global Network Showcase, Caribbean Tales IFF, and a semi-finalist at the Dumbo Film Festival. Welcome, Alexandra.
Thank you, Janine. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here.
Great. So I think what I'm going to do first is ask each of you to give a short synopsis of your film and tell us what the inspiration was behind making it, like what inspired you to even go down this road of making these documentaries. So we can start in reverse. Alexandra, maybe you can.
Absolutely. So The Forgotten Boys is a documentary, medium-length film, and it follows the stories of three young men, Jareem, Cornelius, and Jemai, who were at some point incarcerated and have interacted with the prison system, and were a part of a debate team and an English program led by Debbie Jacob. And this concept came to be, I was living in Trinidad still, working as a content developer associate at TV6, and just being there, seeing the mainstream news and the narratives that we kind of see perpetuated day to day. When it comes to crime, it's quite one-dimensional. And I feel that, you know, we have these stigmas about people that don't necessarily get into the sociological depth, the human aspect of why these things happen, why these injustices happen, why people commit crime. And it removes the human element and the element of like the wealth gap. And so I was working there, and I was working next to a producer of a show similar to Crime Watch, Inspector Alexander's show, seeing that every day. And it was kind of depressing and, again, just very linear. And I was like, how can we kind of balance out what we see in the mainstream? How can we tell stories differently and allow people who are traditionally, you know, stigmatized or misrepresented be empowered and tell their own stories? So that's when the concept for Untold kind of came about. And the idea was for it to be a documentary series where each episode thematically differed, but it was a different misrepresented group each time. So the idea of focusing on incarcerated people came because I was at TV6. Crime is something that we see daily in news in Trinidad. And I wanted to tell it from a different perspective. So that's when, kind of just in talking, I was introduced to Debbie. And Debbie is the one who told me about a lot of her students. And from there, we developed the whole production.
Excellent. Thanks. Speaking of wanting to sort of tell stories differently, I will now go over to Rudy, because his film really wanted to shine a different sort of spotlight on Boston and Boston's inner city. So Rudy, can you tell us about your film and what inspired it?
Yeah, thank you, Janine. And similar to Alexandra, so the film deals with young men involved in gang activity in Boston, and an organization, Street Safe Boston, that of street workers and social workers who work effectively to transform their lives. So myself, I grew up when we came to Boston and migrated here in a low-income neighborhood in Boston, Roxbury, in a housing project called Academy Homes. So in growing up within that environment, I I had friends who eventually became involved in gangs, and they, to a person, try to keep me away from it. But I saw them in a very different light. So in the news, you would always see these negative stories. So I always wanted to be able to try to see if I can get them to tell their story. So when I started out to work on this documentary, I worked with the Street Safe organization, thinking the film would be about the street workers and the people working with them. And they took me out to the streets to meet the young men. And then they were willing to tell their stories, which I didn't know. Because think about it, no one really asked them. They kind of ostracized. And when they told their stories and you heard the backstory and some of the dysfunction and lack of opportunities and so on, you say to yourself, that could be me if I were, put into that situation. So, fortunately enough, we were able to, get the film done and get it out first to screenings. And then, we were picked up for distribution. And now it's on Showtime in the US for the next couple of years on the movie channel. Everybody who sees the film, Janine says, it really humanizes these young men. I didn't know. And the film resonates across the country with the situation in the different cities with gangs. So I find that those folks who see it, they say, how can we help? What can we do? Because they see them in a different light, and they realize that as a society, we need to do better.
That's fantastic. Moving on to Ian, because Alexandra did mention Beyond the Tape. Ian's film deals with the other show that deals with crime watch. So Ian, can you tell us a little bit about the film Party Done?
I'd say it's a character portrait of Ian Allen, who's a very controversial figure in Trinidad and across the Caribbean for his show Crime Watch. And I guess for the background for me, why I'm interested in it is back in 2008. So going back a couple of years now, my grandfather was murdered in Tabaquite in Trinidad. If people aren't familiar with Tabaquite is, it's kind of in the geographic center of the island. And my grandfather didn't have a life of crime or anything. He wasn't part of gangs or anything like that. He was in his 80s. He was a World War II veteran. He's a pensioner. And it just seems that he was the victim of a home invasion that eventually led to his murder. And so when we all went down there for the funeral and to deal with everything, we quickly discovered that it seemed that the police, for perhaps a number of reasons or no reason at all, I felt just really weren't doing such a great job. Whether they were just inundated with crime, because at the time in 2008, some of you might remember, this was really when things started to ramp up in terms of kidnappings and other murders in Trinidad. And so maybe they just didn't have the resources, or for a whole bunch of reasons, I'm not sure. But we just never felt that we got any sort of justice, and no one was ever convicted of the crime. And starting to ask around, we quickly found out that our situation, was actually the norm. And in fact, the vast majority of murders in Trinidad go unsolved, which is sad, because there's so many people that don't get just any form of justice in whatever you want to consider justice to be. I don't think there's any sort of that that's happening in Trinidad for many families. And as I started to follow and learn more about crime and what was happening in Trinidad, I found out about Ian Allen, who's just a regular guy that was trying to effect change through some very controversial methods. But I don't think anyone would deny his sincerity in trying to make the country a better place, and his love for the country, I'd say. And so, due to his controversial nature, I'm naturally drawn to people like that are very polarizing. And so the film is sort of an investigation of him, not so much of crime in Trinidad, because I think that's a much bigger topic that I don't think the film could handle, but it's really more about him and the techniques that he uses.
Right. Thanks for sharing that backstory as well, Ian. Thank you. Let's move on to François. Tell us a bit about your film, just a short synopsis, and what inspired you to make it.
My film is about the Hmong community, which it is based in Laos, into the mountains. This story is about the fact that in 1979, part of the Hmong were moved in the French Guiana by the French government. They were rejected by the communist regime in Laos and Thailand and Vietnamese. So they were in danger, and French government, they proposed to them to be moved into the French Guiana, but on the west coast. And 2 years before, some of them, they've been welcomed on the south of Coyette, which is on the ocean side. So 2 years before, some of them have been welcomed in French Guiana, but south of Cayenne, and 1979 in Javoué, which is the film. But it was 40 years. They celebrated the 40 years that they've been welcomed in French Guiana. So no film has been well done about the Hmong from Javoué, and I wanted to let them speaking about their story and how they grown in the French Guiana, with the religions, with the traditions, with the languages as well. So it's a film about a community more than some characters, but it speaks about some generation, like the elders and the youngers. They are not in the same opinion, because some of them, they want to make an evolution about I don't know, about the work. They don't want to be farmers as the oldest one. So there is it was a time of a change. So it was good to film that, because I wanted to show that, and how young people, they want to evolve and change the point of view of the elders. Because there is a broken point of view. I don't know how to say, but this is the subject of the film. So that's it.
Yeah, I thought it quite a fascinating look at a community that's not always in the public eye. That maybe a lot of viewers didn't even know existed in French Guiana. So thanks for sharing that. Okay, Nicola, you're up. Nicola Cross, can you tell us about your film and what inspired you to make it? It's not simple subject matter.
So my film, Becky, is about one Kenyan story, one Kenyan woman's story. There are 200 million women and girls on the planet who have had their genitals cut away in some form or fashion, known as circumcision or female genital mutilation or cutting. And I was brought up in Trinidad, and privileged, educated, middle class, Port of Spain, light skin. And I went to Kenya, and I've been working with women in Trinidad and other places in community development. And when I was in Kenya, I was working with various NGOs to start off with on female genital mutilation, anti-FGM campaigns, and also other health conditions that women have to deal with, obstetric fistula. And I ended up in an Airbnb, and I was working with one of these NGOs on the anti-FGM campaign. And I was ranting on the phone to a friend of mine in Trinidad. I can't believe what's going on with these women and how people, and the whole patriarchal system, and that, which means that it's women that are cutting women. So there I was ranting. So about after a week, Becky says to me, I have something to tell you. So I said, what's that? She says, well, I've been cut. So I said, okay. And then she says, there's something else. So I said, yes. And she said, I got a new clitoris. And I went, you know, this is a film, right? She said, yes. That's why it took me a week to tell you. So it was sort of a natural progression in terms of my life and working with community development, and then being more and more connected with the experience of women and girls. And I guess what was interesting about Becky is one of the things I remember her saying to me, we were, you know, talking about after her being cut, she would stand, you know, waiting for the traffic lights to change to cross the road. And she would look to the left and see a woman, and she would feel that she would never, ever feel good enough as a woman because she'd been cut, because her genitals had been cut from her. And I felt, I felt a deep connection. So although my genitals were intact, being in the Caribbean, I had a sense of, I knew that feeling of not being good enough as a woman, despite all this privilege and opportunity that I had. And so I thought it was quite interesting that we had come from such different worlds, and yet there was this connection as women. But I also kind of didn't want to do, the way I work with people, it's a very sort of dynamic way. So it's Becky's story. I'm the filmmaker, and I have to convey her story in the way that she experienced the world. It's hers, and I feel my job is sort of channeling her, which is a whole nother issue documentary-wise. But yeah, I think it's
well, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's really about the personalizing and her resilience. So I think people feel it's a very depressing story or it's hard. I don't see it like that. And I know lots of people don't see it like that. It's about, she's so amazing. She's just, it's not even about resilience in terms of what she's experienced. This is one individual woman on this planet who's just amazing for lots of different reasons. She happens to have been cut. So I think for me, it was a very sort of, it was putting a person within this context of all these women who have experienced it. This is one woman's story, and it's that sort of the danger of a single story, but this is just one woman.
Yes. Well, it's interesting, Nicola, that you say you're the filmmaker, you're the medium, it's her story to tell. Because I think that's a good sort of segue into what documentary filmmaking is really meant to accomplish. So, I mean, if I had to define it, it would be the retelling of something that actually happened in a creative way, a compelling way, while framing it in a particular perspective. And very often, that particular perspective does reflect a bit of the filmmaker himself or herself. So I guess what I'm wondering is, do you all agree with that assessment? And what do you think is the most important ingredient in a good documentary film? Is it truth? Is it balance? Is it attention? Is it bearing witness? I mean, how do you all feel? Who wants to go first?
I guess.
All right, I'm going to nominate. What
I
about?
can speak to that. So I think.
Yeah,
I
go
think
ahead.
For me,
go ahead,
the
Rudy.
most important thing is figuring out what stories you want to tell, and hopefully, it's stories that haven't been told. And for me, it's from communities that have been disenfranchised and are underserved in the city of Boston. So once I figure out the story I want to tell, then I need to figure out where I can go best to tell that story and to try to build trust with the folks whose stories I'm trying to tell. And then once I'm able to build that trust, and the way I do that is by immersing myself within that environment with these people before bringing cameras in. And then once I'm able to build the trust, me with them with me, then I feel like for a good documentary, you're able to get the type of access you need. And I do cinema verite style. So that's kind of my take on it, telling stories that I feel will be, impactful, and stories that folks haven't heard yet from the real heroes of our community in some cases. And you can't, you know, Marvel comics, you don't see they're those heroes, but there is a lot of heroes around us.
Yes, agreed. I kind of want to riff off of what you just said there about doing it within your community, but I'll save that for later. Does anybody else have a perspective they want to share on that question? Ian?
I have a lot to say about it, but I'll try to be brief. I'm primarily a filmmaker, a fiction narrative filmmaker. And so coming to documentary is a little bit different for me, but at the same time, with this particular film, I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I'm trying to move people. I'm trying to get people to feel something at some point during the film itself. That's for me when I feel like I've done the job. And although everything that we filmed really did happen, it may not have happened in that order, right? And so we took some liberties with editing to tell a more cohesive story than I think if we were to tell the story in the way in which we filmed things. But I'm okay with that. And I remember the saying that I always keep in my head, and that is, and there's going to be some documentary people that will get upset with me about this, but I still believe it. And it's, don't let facts get in the way of the truth, right? So there is some truth. I'm trying to get at the truth of who Ian Allen is. And so the facts of the order in which we filmed things or the order in which things happened, maybe we've massaged it a little bit, even though those things really did happen. It wasn't in that order, maybe in different places that we're putting things together. But ultimately, we're going towards a truth that I think really does exist within him or within the situation. So that's for me is where I'm always coming from, at least with this particular film, and with my more narrative work as well, in the fiction work.
That's an interesting perspective, Ian. Nicola, since you approached it very differently, that you were there to tell her story, sort of the channel through which it came, how do you react to that?
I think everybody gets to tell the documentary the way they want it, and I think that's the beauty of it. I mean, I guess I come from a development background, and so I've been thinking about this in a way, maybe because I feel I don't have voice, that I try and give other people voice, and you can't give other people voice. All you can do is facilitate it. So I guess my job really is to create an arena within which women who want to tell their story feel safe and supported, whether that means I have to have counselors there to make sure that that continue. I just finished a film, end of last year, I did one on unsafe abortion, and I was just like, I'm not doing this unless we have a counselor there. So maybe in terms of what Ian is saying, maybe I'm not a documentary filmmaker, maybe I'm a channel, maybe I'm somebody who just raises the volume, maybe, because it's almost like I'm not saying what I want to say, but yet that is totally untrue because one, I'm choosing the people, I'm choosing the topic. The reality is my subjectivity is there. I might pretend I'm invisible, but it's not. But I'm also Precisely. Maybe honing in. So for me, it's the connection. So maybe I'm just honing in and maybe I'm pretending, but maybe for me, it feels like I connect with this person on this thing. And so that subjectivity, maybe I am telling my story in a way.
I hear you. Yeah, no, that's an interesting consideration. I mean, the thing is that despite the subject matter, the thread that connects all of your films is one of social justice and, of course, injustice, inequity, violence, trap of poverty, maybe being on the wrong side of the tracks, how the vulnerable in society are treated, how people are very often, in the case of Alexandra's film, forced to change their lives because of circumstance, some of it external, some self-inflicted. So I think all your films essentially ask, how can society better serve all its members, right? But I guess based on what Ian was saying, I mean, just like dramatic films, documentaries have a structure, right? You have a plot and a setting and characters, and those characters have desires, and there's obstacles, and there's rising action and falling action and resolution, and hopefully some point along the way there's growth. But in real life, things don't always, you don't always tie up the loose ends so succinctly. So how do you grapple with that as filmmakers? Maybe we'd like to hear from Alexandra and François on this. They had very different subject matters, but I think it's an interesting question for both of them.
Yeah, I think yes, it depends the subject you are choosing to treat, but sometimes the reality is hard to film or to give a deep not subject but deep treatment about what you see and what the characters they want to tell or not tell because they are so shy or it's too intimate, so deep for them. But you have to choose another way to speak about your subject or how to treat that without getting trouble the character or something like that. So I think you have the beginning of your film, and you're gonna go to film it, the characters, the scenes, or something like that. But at the end, sometimes it's not what you wanted to do at the beginning. But you have to be to adapt yourself about the reality and to be, I think, more near of the reality and how things are gonna be. Yes. I don't know how to say.
How they unfold. Yes, it's very true. I think you very often.
It's like that you learn this job, and I think how you can be efficient. So and you learn and you learn and you say how to respect everything, the subject, the characters, the scenes, and to be close out of your subject from the beginning to the end to show to the people and to be close that you wanted to do at the beginning, I think. But yes, that's my point of view.
Yes. François, can I ask you as well to just check your headset, because apparently we're getting a bit of distortion on the live on your audio.
Okay.
So maybe just double check.
Okay.
Just double check. But that is very true, Alexandra, in terms of, I'm sure you documentary filmmakers often go in thinking they're going to make one particular type of film, and then the story sort of tells itself based on the interviews you do and who you meet with, and then a very different angle unfolds. So what was that like for you?
No, absolutely. I think documentary is a very unpredictable and fluid kind of medium, and you just have to be kind of willing to roll with the punches. So of course you have a concept going in, you know who your subjects are going to be, and like Rudy said, it's about establishing that trust with your subjects and that familiarity so that they feel comfortable sharing their stories. Because in our situation, that required a lot of vulnerability and bravery, them reflecting on these very challenging situations and hardships, and having established that trust off camera and, going into the interviews, yes, you have your questions framed, but you don't necessarily know what kind of emotion that's going to elicit, what kind of response that's going to elicit. And so it kind of takes shape later in the editing room. And that's when, everything kind of gets structured. And for me, that process, the film, The Forgotten Boys, it took us 3 years to finish. Originally, it was supposed to be a short film. And just with the interviews we were getting, we had so much material to work with. I was like, actually, I think I could perceive this being longer. And our editor and DP, they told me, because I did the rough cut myself originally. And they said, Alex, don't go in with a time restriction on yourself. Go in and organically edit how you see fit. And whatever timestamp that hits, it ended up hitting a pretty awkward timestamp because we're like just below feature and like a little, like way too long to be a short. We're at 43 minutes. So we're at this kind of awkward place, you know? But That's just what this story, that's how this story was formed. That's the length that it was supposed to be. And you just kind of have to trust that flow and process and see it through. So that's my perspective.
Now, all of you have spoken about, and that's great. All of you have spoken about the trust that you have to engender with your subjects. So Rudy, for instance, said that he went in and he met the boys who were part of gangs in Boston. To make them understand that he was trustworthy and I guess competent and trustworthy enough to hear and to tell their story. But what about the trust between the filmmaker and the audience? Where does that factor in? In other words, I guess what I'm trying to get at is it's very, especially when working with organizations, right? Like Rudy did with Street Safe and so on. You have to strive to tell compelling but balanced stories without falling prey perhaps to the pressures of inflating the conflict or, making the danger seem more imminent than it actually is to make a story seem compelling. So how do you establish these parameters of what that truth is? And that's very different from what Ian is saying, like a driving scene may not all be in the same area, or, this might have happened before that. How do you establish what those parameters of trust are with your audience?
If I could try to give this a shot with this, just to kind of address what Ian had mentioned, I think you had mentioned don't let facts get in the way of truth. I think life is not linear, right? So you may film something. So I think it's okay to be able to move things around, to be able to tell the story you need to tell. I think the other thing is that for me, I try to, because I want to tell stories that folks don't know about, I want to create a safe space for those people who never heard from to be able to tell their stories in a very authentic way. And if I'm true to those things, I think the audience, again, will be able to tell what's real and what's not, if it's authentic or if it's not. So I think in terms of, and again, to address the fact, as a filmmaker, things change. And you can't just go in with your concept and try to force it to that concept. You have to be willing to change. And I found when I've changed, like for This Ain't Normal, it's not just about the street workers now who had incredible backstories, but about the young people I had to shift. Or with the current film about Black barbershops and hair salons and what they've meant to US society for decades, the sense of community, all those things. So I was ready to finish filming, last year, and COVID hit. And I'm like, I have to continue because I don't know if these small black businesses are going to survive and what's going to happen. So as a filmmaker, I said, I have to find a way to continue to find the funding to continue filming.
Thanks for that. Yeah. If I can switch to Nicola for a bit, because all of you tackle tough topics. And I agree with you, Nicola, that Becky, I didn't quite know what to expect when I first started watching, because of course FGM it's not an easy topic, but you managed to make it a very joyful film, which takes some skill. So how did you get to that place? I mean, did you know going in that it wasn't going to be this, sort of very heavy thing? I mean, it was heavy. You didn't misrepresent her trauma at all, but it does feel like a very hopeful film.
I think I go on emotions, so it's that connecting thing. So I just connected to her, and the process meant that I was conveying her, even though I wasn't invisible. I get that. So I don't think I thought about audience. I think about audience, but not really. I think in terms of, right, who the audience, what are they going to want, but I don't think I actually do think about them. I'm thinking about Becky and what she's trying to say. What's the essence of what she's trying to say? And I think sometimes sort of recently I've been doing some reflection on it. I think, well, maybe I actually made the wrong film. Because if I'm talking about stories that are, sort of about decolonization, the anti-FGM movement started by the English missionaries. and there were the Mau Mau women who, in protest with against the British, some of them were not cut, and they went off into the forest with razor blades and cut themselves. They cut their own genitals as a form of protest. So in a way, this film, you could argue, you know, is supporting the colonial idea that cutting is a bad thing, which I have to say, you know, do I agree because I'm Western educated, etc.? I happen to believe that no, violence is not a good thing. So I think those complexities come out. And also, if you're talking about changing cultures, in West Africa, they call FGM, female genital cutting, in respect, because they're talking about human rights. They don't actually talk about cutting. They work with communities on a human rights basis until the communities come to on their own accord of it. We get it. We get the human rights thing. This is not good. We don't want to cut women and girls anymore. So I think it's really complicated. So maybe I made the wrong pill.
Yeah. Well, you made a good film, so you know, every film has its place. And speaking of place, I want to go back to Rudy to ask how, coming from Trinidad, I mean, I'm not sure at what age you migrated, but coming from a Caribbean space in which the worldview is very often different from the global North, has that impacted how you make films, what angles you take, what the tone is, or does it impact at all?
Definitely, it has to. So I came up here when I was 14, and my dad came up here as undocumented, right? But we came from a poor, humble, poor beginnings. But the thing is, I always had a sense of family there, cosmopolitan, right? So I didn't, race to me wasn't a factor because I had family of all races. So when I came up to the United States, that was a big issue, right? The fact of what was happening around before civil rights movement, how African Americans were treated. And since I came and the place I lived was in a predominantly Black, low-income neighborhood, that lived experience had a big impact in the type of films that I wanted to make. So in the beginning, I made films in Boston about the Trinidad Carnival. I would always go back about our culture. And again, there's a progression. And as I, made films, I wanted people to understand what the Trinidad culture was about steel bands. But then it slowly kind of transformed into things about, as I said, the underserved communities here in Boston, the Black neighborhoods. And you would see Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, they would make films, but not about these neighborhoods, about other neighborhoods in Boston. And I always felt like, why aren't films being made about these things that are issues that are happening here, but the real heroes and people who are working diligently to affect lives of others. So our lived experiences have to have an impact on the type of things we do. That's why we need diversity in every aspect of media and what we're involved in. And yeah, so yeah, coming from Trinidad, obviously, I'm back home all the time. That has an impact in who I am.
I like the fact that your film tackled the issue of respect. What is respect? How is it shown? I mean, it factors heavily into, I guess, gang culture in terms of how they retaliate, how they manage anger, etc. And there was one scene with a street safe mentor, I guess, who was talking to, I think it might have been Brandon, about, that these sorts of conflicts are going to happen in life and you need to know how to manage it. And it struck me that in teaching him about how not to give into triggers, he slowly learned to build up his own self-respect. And then towards the end of the film, I think the audience cannot help but have a different view of the characters, that they may have, different from how they may have gone into it. And that inevitably respect had to be part of that new impression that your filmmaking may have forged, because they never had the opportunity to see characters like that in such a light. So Just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Moving on to François, we're talking about trust. Was it difficult to be accepted as a foreign filmmaker into such a tight-knit and remote community and be trusted to tell their story? I mean, it's fascinating to me, I guess, how filmmakers can navigate different countries and so on and so on. A lot of Caribbean filmmakers may feel that they have to stay close to home to tell their stories, but Nicola has told a story of a woman in Africa. Ian is based in the States and has told the story of Ian Alain. How was it for you in trying to sort of integrate into that community to be able to be trusted?
It wasn't not so difficult. Even Hmong people are so shy. They don't trust a lot foreign people. But this question is also about the territory of the French Guiana, which is based, I think, in 8,000 kilometers from France, which is located between Suriname and Brazil. It's an European place far away from Europe. So there is a big historical part with the French Guiana, and so many community they live here, like Haitian people, Hmong people, Brazilian people, Surinamese people, some people from Africa heritage. So this is really strange to live here. I'm here from 3 years from now, so and I have also difficult to be French in this place because of the historical story. So when you go to film the Hmong people, you need to be to understand the real story, and so I spot I think for 1 year just to question the people, and this is the really little place. There is, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people, so everyone knows everyone, and all people, they know the story, and they don't really like someone which is going to film who is this guy, what does he want. So you have to spend time with people, but it's not a legend. They trust you if they see like you spend time and you want to understand the real story, and you don't have to make mistake during film time and the editing time, and after that when you give back the film, you hope there is no mistake, but there is no one, so it's okay. But it's a bit strange for French Guiana, and you have to spend really long time with people, I think, because it's not possible to make mistake with the story of people.
Yes. Yeah, that's very true. Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about the ethics of documentary filmmaking, just because, I mean, if you're doing a fiction-based film, I mean, anything can play, right? But journalistic principles often come into play, and should, I think, when it comes to documentary filmmaking. So how do you tackle things? Like, I want to get down to specifics, like using actors, reenactments, archival footage, that kind of thing. I can maybe put this question to Alexandra and Rudy, because I think each of you, Alexandra, you had some reenactments, or you filmed minor members of some of the boys' families. Rudy, you included the children of some of the characters on camera. So how does that play?
Hi. Yeah, it was interesting for us because we did the interviews, and a lot of what they were referencing were courses that had happened already. So it wasn't a situation where we were able to capture it live. And then also COVID happened. And so less classes were completely shut down and no activity was happening within prison. So while programs were, what we were highlighting, it was unfortunate because when we got to doing the B-roll days, the programs were closed. So we had to kind of figure out a creative way to finesse and recreate and these scenes. So we had to wait it out for a bit, and then we're able to get back into YTC, which is the youth training center. They were easier to get into than Port of Spain prison, which was on very tight lockdown in the COVID period. And we were able to film the classes, not filming, because these are youth offenders, you're talking about juveniles. So you can't technically film. I mean, you can't. It's not allowed. You're not allowed to film their faces. So we were forced to creatively kind of work around that by doing, tight shots and just having to finesse it in that way, which is just, all a part of the documentary process. Is you just kind of have to work with the hardships and come up with creative solutions, which is it's interesting. I'll let Rudy kind of take over because my train of thought is going all over.
Yeah, thank you. So I should say, on average, it takes me about 5 years to make a feature-length documentary from concept to distribution. So it takes all of us, Alexandra, you mentioned 3 years. It takes a long time. In terms of, ethics, obviously that's very important to me to be able to tell a story and tell it authentically. And I think in the case of This Ain't Normal, I wanted to be able to show these young people with their families. So, and to get a sense that, no, you just see this aspect of them, but let's see their humanity. So it was important for me to see Jordan in this case with his daughter, and to see them at an arcade, and let's see how he acts, right? And to be able to do that. Obviously, getting release forms, explaining to the mom what's going on, my body of work. Take a look at my body of work, and if you look at that, you'll see, what I'm trying to do. Many people have made films, filmmakers, about gangs, but they try to exploit them, right? They have them branded guns in front of the camera. That wasn't what I was trying to do. So I had to convince them about that.
Yes.
And just briefly in the film, the archival footage that I use, I tried to deal with the topic of how do we have so many gangs in Boston and so many of these young men without fathers. So I went back and showed the mass incarceration that happened here in the United States and in Boston, where everybody gets locked up. So I was able to get archival footage to show that even though they locked everybody up, they didn't think about the consequences of who they left behind, because there were no services to deal with these kids who didn't have parents, right? So they locked everybody up, and we know that was a sham. That didn't work. They weren't looking to rehabilitate. So archival footage was a way for me to tell that. And I just want to say briefly, we have great documentarians in Boston, Frederick Wiseman, Eric Morris, so folks who I can look to say, wow, I can, they're well established, and I can learn, and we pick and choose from different people. But ethics is really important, and respecting my my fellow man, very important.
Yes, I just wondered, just because there was the story of the child being shot in the neighborhood, whether, well, I mean, there's a larger discussion happening on minors and whether consideration should be given to children whose appearance in films or documentaries like this is often given by the adults in their lives. Like, should there be a clause that, if when they become adults and they're not comfortable with it, or did it ever cross your mind that, you could be maybe putting the children that were shown on camera in danger if there was a retaliation from an opposing gang?
That's a great point. So in this case with Jordan, we were way out in the suburbs. So we had taken the child, I'd gotten the permission of both parents, Jordan and his mom and her mom. And then we had taken her to a community way outside of Boston. So there wasn't any danger in that respect. Some of the other interviews we did with the young men, sometimes they were out in the open, but they had different young men from their crew, not I call it crew, who were on the lookout, making sure that there weren't anyone, coming. Again, I was really concerned. Obviously, I don't want anyone to get hurt. And at one point, one of the young men we were interviewing said, guys, we should do the interview here where there's light and there's surveillance cameras. And I said, why? I want to make sure you're safe. He said, no, you and your crew are trying to do something positive, Rudy. And I want to make sure this is the best place to do it because I don't want you to get hurt. And this is a young man who was under siege for his own life and he cared about us. So that's what I mean. Think about these young men. He's thinking about us when his life is in danger.
Yes, because you're giving him voice. I mean, that's quite impressive. When you have, and I'm putting this out to everyone, I mean, when you have production partners to consider, when you think of issues like editorial control, I mean, that generally has to be sorted out earlier on, right? So when you consider the responsibilities of bearing witness to someone else's story, which is often quite traumatic, how do you share that decision-making / control?
Well, I think for me, I've been, again, because I'm in sort of development in one sense, that it's been good. So there was one situation where I was filming and a young woman had been gang raped by 7 men. And she signed the consent forms and she was compensated for her time. And then later on, she decided that she didn't want one of the films on her to be screened. And I think COVID had happened and I don't think it was the film itself. I think she was just in a very understandably dark place. And the client and I just immediately were both on the same page, and it was just like, she doesn't want it, that's it, it's not being screened. So, the people that I work with have been like that. I don't know if that's just luck. I don't know if it's because it's not in the, film industry, as it were. So I'd be interested to hear other people's experiences on that.
Yeah, because how do you, it's particularly when you are talking about the ethics of putting either individuals or communities that don't have power, economic or otherwise, right? And because you as the filmmaker are essentially creating the narrative through the questions you ask, the shots you get, how you edit it together, that narrative will create an impression or point of view that you want the audience to take away. So you have a responsibility to both parties and as Ian says, to tell the truth. So how do you, within those parameters, ensure the protection of people's agency?
Well, I just have to say briefly, I had a couple of situations, films that I had shot in Trinidad that I wanted to, to put out. And one film, it got into kind of a family situation. So I decided, okay, I needed to respect that. Even though I had all the footage ready to go, I had to respect that and not put that film out there. And then I had filmed the coup that happened in Trinidad. And so again, there are a couple of situations where I didn't feel comfortable then moving forward with the film.
Right.
I guess for
Anybody
me,
else?
it's an interesting thing, particularly dealing with Ian Allen and the show Crime Watch. So if you've seen the show, he shows everything, right? Although to be honest with you, the show has changed a little bit over, recently in terms of the graphicness of the show. And, they started to blur faces as well. But for me, it was, we filmed everything, but we blurred many, many faces throughout the film. I thought it was important to do that just because for whether they were a victim of a crime or they were, alleged to be a perpetrator of a crime, we're probably seeing them in their worst day, right? Like the worst day of their life is what we're filming them in this moment. And my standards are a little bit different than what Ian Allen has to deal with. And I don't mean standards in terms of high quality, low quality. I just mean in terms of what we're trying to do, right? Ian Allen's show is doing something completely different than what I think my film is intending to do as well. So my intentions are completely different, and I'm not trying to. I also don't know the background of what's happened to these people that they are in this situation, and that's beyond the scope of what it is I'm trying to do. So if I were to, to show people's faces really specifically, I feel I'd have to spend the time on those people to really develop the story to how did they get into this situation and what happened after we saw this situation on camera. Again, for me personally, that was beyond the scope of what I was trying to do in this film. And so I just blurred many, many faces and tried just to keep the story more on Ian Allen as opposed to the people that he's covering himself.
Right. And Alexandra, in your case, I think there was one character, I believe it was Jamai, who you did not film because he had already passed by the time you had started work on the documentary. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. And I was going to say that the other two.
So how do you?
Yes, sorry. No, let me finish. Let me let you finish.
No, in a case like that, when someone.
Right.
Yes,
So
sorry,
the rights.
there's a bit of a delay.
No worries.
Yes.
Right. So I never actually had the honor of meeting Jamai because he had already passed, and I didn't even have footage of him. It happened that the day that I had contacted Debbie about doing the possibility of doing a film, she was actually giving the eulogy for Jamai's funeral, and she was telling me his story, and I was really moved by it immediately, and I knew that some part of the film had to be a dedication to his story because he was one of the main subjects of her book. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with Wishing for Wings, but it's amazing. It's an amazing book written by Debbie, which not written by Debbie, put together by Debbie and semi-written by Debbie, but it's her students and recounting their own experiences and their writings from her courses. And Jamai was one of her main students who got a 1 in CXC English and was a very talented writer. And so the footage of him actually belonged to another filmmaker, Michael Gallifrey, and Debbie told me about him. They were supposed to do a documentary on the book, Wishing for Wings, and they didn't end up securing enough funding, but they had all this footage that they had shot. So she very kindly gave me Michael's contact information. I reached out to him, and he granted access to the footage. Before I even did that, I had to get the approval of his family, Jamai's family. So I met with his mother and the sister, who I am now very fond of and close to, Susan and Aisha, and established a relationship with them and made sure to get, release forms from them for that footage and their approval, which I was able to get, thankfully. And then other than that, dealing with sensitive subject matter of the other two subjects, Dareem and Cornelius, who both were in remand. Cornelius is still actually in remand. And so his case is something that's sensitive information. And I made a point of not really having them address in length or detail their crimes or their, what they were being accused of, because it was still alleged. These are things that haven't made it to trial. Dareem's case never actually made it to trial. It was thrown out and he was released. And Cornelius is still in there waiting for a trial date. It's really crazy to see how many people, the percentage of the prison population that's actually in remand and the length of time that they can spend there without going to trial. I mean, it's bizarre. It's sometimes 5 to 10 years and you're technically in a holding cell. And yeah, the justice system is, it has its work cut out universally.
Yes.
Yeah. So the focus of the film, I
that
really
was
wanted to be
an angle.
Yes. Sorry, it's lagging a little bit. So I'm just.
Yes. And so it is. That's okay. When you're talking about that, it struck me because that, of course, is an underlying issue. And I think for me, documentary filmmakers are like, they sort of encapsulate the oral tradition, right? So to some extent, we rely on rhetoric to win an audience's favor. So the genre is not simply about imparting information or entertaining an audience. So the question then is, do you leave it open-ended and have people leave the theater with their own opinion? More often than not, do you want to change minds? How do you approach it? Do you think, well, however you leave with whatever impression you leave with, that's fine? Or do you go into it sort of crafting this film with an intention to make somebody be more open or think about something in a different way?
If I can answer that. So for my films, I don't want folks to just come and watch a film and leave the theater and say that's a good film and that's it. I want to move them to action, right? So for whether it's at a film festival or whether we've gotten funding to do screenings to take the film out, we set up question and answers after. Because we want folks to be able to ask questions and to be able to speak to experts, the people who are in the film. I say they're the experts and they can speak to the issues that people want to find out about. So I'm really happy with this current film because it's going to be played next month at the Massachusetts State Legislature. So once those folks see it, I want to move them to change, public policy. And there are folks who are, in some cases, I've heard folks wanting to donate, right? So that's what I want. I want to have that. We played it in DC, New York. I want to move folks to action. Just regular audience members say, wow, it shouldn't be like that. Those kids, we should figure out a way to give them, more support, more resources. So for me personally, for, the films I've made, always have Q&A, and I want to move folks to do something.
That's a very good point, Rudy. And that's a question I was going to ask, because I think that for me, it's something that I have grappled with. So for instance, on my child labor documentary, which was ILO commissioned, and I'm sure they have a lot of things in place on the ground to be able to change things. But I personally felt that after I saw, the situations of many of these children, some of whom lived on the street, for instance, I felt that, okay, the film was done and it was seen, but what were the tangible steps between the film being shown and their lives changing? And it's not always a very linear connection. So, and I think in the Caribbean, I mean, you're in the States, so there's systems that work to be able to sort of attract the attention of people who can change policy. I think in the Caribbean, it gets a little muddier. I don't know how Alexandra feels, for instance, about that. But I do find that sometimes change is slow in coming. And I know that as documentary filmmakers, we all want to see change. Nicola can attest to that too, I think.
Sorry, go ahead, Alex, and then I'll come in after.
No worries. So for me, it resonated a lot what Rudy just said about wanting a call to action, not just it being about provoking thought or stimulating conversation. You actually want people to do something. And I think, it's very easy to point the finger when it comes to looking at large societal issues and say, the government isn't doing enough, authority isn't doing enough, and not concentrating on what our role in giving back and in social change, what could that look like beyond volunteering, once a year or donating? How can we all as individuals kind of work collectively and integrate that into our day-to-day lives of giving back and redistributing the privilege that, a lot of us in this room might have today. And so for me, that is quite central in terms of thematically what I want to evoke from my film and from my work, and figuring out how in distribution too that can be part of it. So beyond film festival spaces, bringing the film to schools and having conversations with youth and having people, volunteer and come in and even assist with the programs in prisons. I mean, Debbie literally created this debate team from nothing, just as one individual, got international funding and was able to build libraries within prisons, and to this day still does amazing work. And how can people maybe come in and support her sustain that? So for me, yeah, it's about us as individuals and what we can do as well.
And Nicola, from a development perspective?
Well, I think that's why I like working with NGOs, because I feel my films, I mean, I suppose an example is Blackfish or an Errol Morris film that, you know, the film is actually a tool for change. And like Rudy was saying, his film is, and I've done an unsafe abortion film and policymakers saw that. But I just feel that if I make a film just like that, it's maybe because I'm, you know, emerging, as it were, that I don't feel I have that power. I don't have that audience. But I also think that I underestimate the power of film as discussion in terms of changing the status quo and coming up with these new things that just make audiences think. I think I underestimate that. But yeah, that's why I choose to work with NGOs. But I don't know, ultimately, in terms of change, it just takes so long and I'm so impatient. I don't know.
Yeah,
I know.
I just want to add, you know,
it's so true.
Yeah, when we make a film, I'm not thinking about distribution or anything. I'm making that film because I think maybe it's going to be important, right, for others to see. And again, you know, there's film festivals, but I'm finding that if I'm able to take the films directly to folks and places that are interested in that, that's a win. If you know, I've been fortunate enough to get national distribution for this film and other films. So folks kind of are looking for what is he doing next. The fact that it's showing all across the United States on Showtime and the movie channel, I have no idea who's going to see it. And when they see it, maybe they'll help a kid in Chicago, in LA, or what have you. If they want me to bring the film there, I'm willing to do it because I want to be able to work with organizations doing work, in this case, to help these young people. So that's the ultimate. I mean, we're documentarian. That's the ultimate for us, right? And I'm so happy to be part of this, to be able to feel like I can help folks, you know, tell stories. So this is amazing. And the fact that you guys, I mean, it's the power of the medium, and folks flock to the theaters to see these big studio films and they're talking about it. Why can't we do that? You know, why can't that happen with our films?
But I also like the idea of teaching
what about,
to make their own films.
So I worked in community access, and that's what I did the first 10 years of my career. I taught people how to make media so they can make their own in the community. So, yeah.
Yes, I agree that it's important to give people the opportunity to tell their own stories. But when you are going into a community, usually a disenfranchised community, to make a film, what about the issue of paying subjects? I mean, if you look at it from a journalistic perspective, it's clearly at odds with journalistic practice, and some documentary filmmakers are, you know, very, very strongly against it. But some independent filmmakers might suggest that it's unethical to profit off of the usually tragic stories of these subjects without compensating them in some way. I mean, how do you all feel about this? Should it be assessed on a case-by-case basis? Does it compromise the integrity of the film to have paid subjects?
Yeah, for me, obviously, I think it compromises the integrity of the project. So, you know, I've had instances where, you know, folks have asked me for payment up front, and I can't do that because, again, it will be questioned. But whenever, and again, we're not going to make a lot of money. Once we sell it nationally, we're lucky if we break even for the next one, right? So folks have the impression that you sell a movie nationwide and you're getting money, like all this money. No, you're lucky if you for documentaries, right? But what I do is I make sure if I do sell the film that everybody gets something on the back end. And I don't feel that impedes the integrity of it, because so I always make sure that I'm able to put, you know, that, and you have lifelong friends. I'm in these people's lives. So it's not like I'm done with you, you'll never hear from me again. I'll reach out, or if they reach out, or if they're part of a Q&A, things like that. So I try to be inclusive in that way.
Exactly. François, did you have to consider that issue at all when you were filming in French Guiana?
I don't understand the question. Sorry.
Oh, it's the issue of whether you pay subjects for participation in the film and whether that is contrary to documentary filmmaking ethics.
But can you just tell me the question in another way, please? I'm sorry.
When you were it's okay. When you were filming in French Guiana, did you pay your subjects at all?
No.
Or
not?
No,
because it's not
right.
on the. When I studied at the university in France and I did some internship or something like that in production or something. The one of the best rule, if there is rule in cinema, is not to pay people you are working with. And I think the question is coming back every time is how do you give back with to your characters the thing they give to you? So how do you deal with that, and how can you to give back what they give to you? So you have to respect them into the way you film them, and how do you edit your film, and how do you your question before was maybe you want to let the audience to change their point of view or their mind or something like that, and I think that's the deal, and that the point is to let the people the audience to convince them about a story or something like that, even the characters, because in my film I wanted to convince the elders, Hmong, to understand why the young girls, they wanted to change the traditions and something like that, to respect the traditions, but to change them to be more in a better condition to live in their life with the capitalism and the Occidental influences, and to deal with tradition and their life. They wanted to live not in a traditional way, but so no, it's not cool to pay the characters, but you have to give them back something, and that's the way to be okay with your job and the job they give to you, something like that.
Yeah, very interesting that it seems across the board that all of you are very uncomfortable with the idea of that. I mean, I can totally see that.
I just wanted to add, Janine, I forgot this.
I want to, well, first of all.
I just want to say one thing I do is I buy food for my crew. I buy food for everybody. So I do make sure people get fed.
Absolutely.
But also, I just wanted to say as well.
I just want to remind.
I was just going to say that in Kenya, in talking about the middle of COVID, I was quite happy to compensate people for their time when people are living on however many dollars a day. And I didn't feel that it compromised the story in that case. I think in certain situations it can. Like I remember talking to somebody who's like, these migrants, and they're going, do I give them the money to get? So I think, but giving somebody some money, to get lunch, and like you say, feeding. So there are other ways, and I guess it's a case by case thing. But you could get tricky.
Absolutely.
Yes, I think it's not a question of money. It's just a question of respect. But if you put money in this kind of exchange, it's a bit strange. So you can share food together or something like that. That's okay. But after that, it's a bit strange with the relation. Yes.
Yeah, it starts to get a little gray. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I want to, well, first of all, I want to remind the audience that they can send in questions, and the questions will be fed to me by TTFF if you want to ask anybody any particular question. I would like to talk a little bit, though, about technology and ethics. So quite recently, there was a documentary film that was showing on Netflix called Roadrunner, which was about Anthony Bourdain's life. And the director used artificial intelligence to mimic his voice, reading an email that was sent before his death, but he didn't declare that he had used AI. And social media users called it out as a deep fake, and there was a lot of controversy over that because people felt that it was a betrayal, and not having declared it couldn't necessarily discern the difference between his actual voice and what they faked, I guess. And Morgan Neville, who's the director, basically he defended his ethics by saying that he wasn't putting words into his mouth; he was just trying to make that scene come alive. And I'm wondering, as technology advances, how does that factor into the ethics of documentary filmmaking? How do you see that unfolding in the future and impacting filmmakers like yourselves?
I guess I can speak to it. I think in the specific case that you're talking about with Roadrunner, I know the film, and I'm okay with what they did because those words were actually his, right? Like it was an actual email that was sent by Anthony Bourdain. If they had made up the whole thing, that I feel like that's perhaps a problem. But the fact that it actually did exist as an email, it really did come from him, I'm okay with it. I agree it's walking the line, but personally, I'm fine with it.
Mm-hmm.
Again,
but do you think it should have been declared? Do you think it should have been declared?
No, I'm okay with it not being declared. I'm totally okay with it. But again, I'm coming from a different perspective from like a lot of other documentary purist filmmakers. Again, I'm like the truth. The truth of the situation is that Anthony Bourdain did actually say those words, and so that we do have all of these freedoms available to us. To me, it's just a natural extension of the technology of editing, of sort of the art of putting things together in a way that builds some cohesion to tell a story. These are just tools that are available to filmmakers to help tell the story that they want to tell. And don't get me wrong, it definitely is a slippery slope. Yeah. I'm aware of that for sure.
Yes.
And perhaps down the line it could become problematic, but I'm okay with pushing the boundaries of what is of the tools available to us just to tell more effective storytelling.
Anybody else wants to weigh in?
Yeah, I think if you're in media, you know that you could make anything positive. I could have taken my footage and made a very negative documentary, and we know the power of the medium. That's why we're involved. We need diversity, but it's your personal integrity, right? And whether that's going to, if you were to in some way, create something that isn't fully authentic, it's up to the audience will probably discern that. But I think there's a power in this medium, and there are folks who are documentarians who are using it in a very different negative way. So we know the power of the medium. So, I mean, that could be done. And I think it's just up to each of us to, police each other, I think, to make sure. And personally, from where we're coming from in terms of integrity, making sure that we're really reflecting what is authentic.
Agreed. We have a few more minutes left, I think maybe 3 or 4. I wanted to ask one question, which is that sometimes telling probing or investigative stories in small societies like the Caribbean can be quite disruptive, as everyone knows everybody else. How do you deal with that? I mean, there is a kind of a hump to be overcome. Alexandra, maybe?
Sorry. Yeah. No, I think a lot of good happens in discomfort. So I kind of take pride off of making people be faced with maybe something, situationally they haven't seen before or thought about or considered. I think that's where a lot of growth and good conversation can come from. So I play with that in my work. I hope that happens and that creates a space that leads to something good.
Excellent. Okay, we have exactly 149 minutes left. Maybe we could do a quick round robin. What did you love most about your film, and what did you feel you could have done better? Let's start with Alexandra. The timer's on.
Yes, loved most, I would say, just interacting with all of our subjects. I consider them family now, to be honest. It was a very just amazing experience, and I appreciate the relationships and just what they've shared. In terms of what we could have done better, I mean, there's always so much. I think, you look at a work and you can constructively criticize it, and there's ways to evolve. And so I'm not going to pinpoint one thing, but I see it as, this is the first piece that I directed and produced, and it's a learning process.
Okay. Ian?
The stuff that I loved most was being, seeing behind the scenes of things. I'm always interested in how things are made and how things are done. And I got to experience that. I got to see what it's like to really make a show like Crime Watch and be somebody or be around someone like Ian Allen. What could have been done better? I mean, listen, when I look at my films, I only see mistakes all the time, right? So I always see those things. But perhaps like one of the things I encountered was that we tried to interview just people on the street and get, so-called man on the street interviews with citizens. And that was really hard to do when it came to talking about crime and talking about Ian Allen on camera. Without the camera rolling, everybody's willing to talk. But once the camera was rolling, nobody would talk. And I wish we had tried a little bit harder to get some of those man on the street interviews. Even though we did try, I feel like I could have done a little bit more to make that happen.
Yeah. I think I might be getting the Academy Award music right about now. Are we out of time, Tennille? She's not responding. Or maybe it's just that I'm lagging.
I think she may be on mute.
Okay. No, yeah, maybe. Well, no news is good news. So, Rudy, you want to take the question really quickly? Best, what you love most and what you would think you could have done better?
The many young people and people that we were able to interview, and the fact, our production values, how we were able to approach to tell the story. And unfortunately, two of the young men in the film are no longer alive. So that's the sad part of this, right? But that's their legacy. It lives on.
Okay. Yes. Excellent. Nicola?
The best thing of the film is my friendship with Becky now. And she continues inspiring me. The thing that one of the things, well, of course, it's, like Ian said, as soon as you're finished, even in the middle of it, I'm like, hey, I just want to start all over again. But I think I'm starting thinking more about what's not in the frame and the context, the post-colonial context. What's not in the frame? What needs to be in the frame that isn't there? But my thing is, I really like the close-up. I don't like this establishing shot stuff. I just want to go right in there. So I guess maybe I have to learn to come up, but I don't want to. So I guess that's the challenge.
I hear you. François, I will come to you to ask that question, but we have a question from the audience, from Kevin Adams. He wants to know, did you guys end up making the same film you thought you were going to make at the outset, or did it change? Ian's shaking his head. Who wants to take it?
So it changed, as I mentioned
François, maybe
before.
you should take that one.
Go ahead, François.
Oh, Rudy. Yes. No, go ahead, Rudy. Yeah, I remember you said that it turned out to be a very different film.
Yeah, and all of my films seem to go that way. I think it's going to be about the street workers and social workers, and then suddenly the young people are willing to tell their stories, so it shifted. So it definitely turned to something different, but better, right? I feel.
Yes. And François, what about you?
I don't know. I just wanted to say, like, I really appreciated the time I spent with my characters, and I just wanted to the audience to feel about the history of the French Guiana and this community, and to feel when you watch the movie what I discovered about my country and the story of my country and what happened before and the colonialism of the France. And this is a little part of the colonial story of France and the other countries, good or bad, but it's a part of history, and we have to know about that.
Absolutely. Well, that's, I think, a good note to end on. So I'd like to thank all of you for being available and sharing your experiences. Thank you so much. I think I have to hand over now to Tennille because we're out of time.
Yes.
So thank all of you, Alexandra, Rudy, Nicola, Ian, François. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Janine and panelists, for the insightful discussion. Again, this panel was brought to you with the support of Shell Trinidad and Tobago Limited. To check out the films in this year's festival, please go to our website, ttfilmfestival.com, for dates. You can find a full list of all the festival films on the website there. If you have any feedback, please be sure to share your experience with us via email, admin@filmco.org. And if you do happen to post about us on social media, please tag us because we like to remain connected to our filmmakers and friends. So on behalf of the TTFF, we hope you enjoyed the panel, and we do hope to see you again at other events. Enjoy the rest of the festival. Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
See ya.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.